Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. So find a comfortable spot, adjust your volume, take a nice deep breath in, let it out slowly, and off we go. Before we begin tonight's reading, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to Amy, the latest member of our Patreon family. Amy, thank you so much for becoming a supporter of this podcast. Your help makes it possible for everyone, and it's much appreciated. I'd also like to congratulate David for snapping up the last of the personal recordings that were being offered. I'll have a new special offer on Patreon in the coming weeks, and I hope you take the time to check it out. As always, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the show description. Now, let's get to the reading. This evening, we're reading from a work that perhaps more than any other shaped our image of a very well-known subject. A general history of the pirates, from their first rise and settlement in the island of Providence to the present time, with the remarkable actions and adventures of the two female pirates, Mary Read and Anne Bonny, to which is added a short abstract of the statute of civil law in relation to piracy. Second edition with considerable additions, printed for and sold by T. Warner at the Black Boy in Paternoster Row, London, 1724, by Captain Charles Johnson, the pseudonym of Daniel Defoe. Let's begin. The Preface. Having taken more than ordinary pains in collecting the materials which compose the following history, we could not be satisfied with ourselves if anything were wanting to it which might render it entirely satisfactory to the public. It is for this reason we have subjoined to the work a short abstract of the laws now in force against pirates, and made choice of some particular cases which have been heretofore tried, by which it will appear what actions have and what have not been adjudged piracy. It is possible this book may fall into the hands of some masters of ships and other honest mariners, who frequently, by contrary winds or tempests, or other accidents incident to long voyages, find themselves reduced to great distresses, either through scarcity of provisions or want of stores. I say it may be a direction to such as those, what lengths they may venture to go without violating the law of nations, in case they should meet other ships at sea, or be cast on some inhospitable shore, which should refuse to trade with them for such things as are absolutely necessary for the preservation of their lives, or the safety of the ship and cargo. We have given a few instances in the course of this history of the inducements men have to engage themselves headlong in a life of so much peril to themselves and so destructive to the navigation of the trading world. To remedy which evil there seems to be but two ways, either to find employment for the great numbers of seamen turned adrift at the conclusion of a war, and thereby prevent their running into such undertakings, or to guard sufficiently the coast of Africa, the West Indies, and other places whereto pirates resort. I cannot but take notice in this place that during this long peace I have not so much as heard of a Dutch pirate. It is not that I take them to be honester than their neighbors, but when we account for it, it will perhaps be a reproach to ourselves for our want of industry. The reason I take to be that after a war, when the Dutch ships are laid up, they have a fishery where their seamen find immediate business and as comfortable bread as they had before. Had ours the same recourse in their necessities, I'm certain we should find the same effect from it, for a fishery is a trade that cannot be overstocked. The sea is wide enough for us all, and we need not quarrel for elbow room. Its stores are infinite, and will ever reward the laborer. Besides, our own coast, for the most part, supply the Dutch, who employ several hundred sail constantly in the trade, and so sell to us our own fish. I call it our own, for the sovereignty of the British seas are to this day acknowledged us by the Dutch and all the neighboring nations. Wherefore, if there was a public spirit among us, it would be well worth our while to establish a national fishery, which would be the best means in the world to prevent piracy, employ a number of the poor, and ease the nation of a great burden by lowering the price of provision in general, as well as of several other commodities. I need not bring any proofs of what I advance, viz., that there are multitudes of seamen at this day unemployed. It is but too evident by their straggling and begging all over the kingdom. Nor is it so much their inclination to idleness as their own hard fate in being cast off after their work is done to starve or steal. I have not known a man of war commissioned for several years past, but 3 times her complement of men have offered themselves in 24 hours. The merchants take their advantage of this, lessen their wages, and those few who are in business are poorly paid and but poorly fed. Such usage breeds discontents among them, and it makes them eager for any change. I shall not repeat what I have said in the history concerning the privateers of the West Indies, where I have taken notice they live upon spoil, and as custom is a second nature, it is no wonder that, when an honest livelihood is not easily had, they run into one so like their own, so that it may be said that privateers in time of war are a nursery for pirates against a peace. Now we have accounted for their rise and beginning, it will be natural to inquire why they are not taken and destroyed before they come to any head, seeing that they are seldom less than 12 men of war stationed in our American plantations, even in time of peace, a force sufficient to contend with a powerful enemy. This inquiry, perhaps, will not turn much to the honor of those concerned in that service. However, I hope I may be excused if what I hint is with the design of serving the public. I say, 'tis strange that a few pirates should ravage the seas for years without ever being light upon by any of our ships of war, when in the meantime they, the pirates, shall take fleets of ships. It looks as if one was more diligent in their affairs than the other. Roberts and his crew alone took 400 sail before he was destroyed. This matter I may probably set right another time, and only observe for the present that the pirates at sea have the same sagacity with robbers at land, as the latter understand what roads are most frequented and where it is most likely to meet with booty, so the former know what latitude to lie in order to intercept ships. And as the pirates happen to be in want of provisions, stores, or any particular lading, they cruise accordingly for such ships, and are morally certain of meeting with them. And by the same reason, if the men of war cruise in those latitudes, they might be as sure of finding the pirates as the pirates are to find the merchant ships. And if the pirates are not to be met with by the men of war in such a latitude, then surely down the same latitude may the merchant ships arrive safely to their port. To make this a little plainer to my country readers, I must observe that all our outward bound ships, some time after they leave the land, steer into the latitude of the place they are bound to, if to the West India Islands, or any part of the main of America, as New York, New England, Virginia, etc., because the latitude is the only certainty in those voyages to be found, and then they sail due west till they come to their port, without altering their course. In this west way lie the pirates, whether it be to Virginia, etc., or Nevis, St. Christopher's, Montserrat, Jamaica, etc., so that if the merchant ships bound thither do not fall a prey to them one day, they must another. Therefore I say, if the men of war take the same track, the pirates must unavoidably fall into their mouths, or be frighted away, for where the game is, there will the vermin be. If the latter should be the case, the trading ships, as I said before, will pass unmolested and safe, and the pirates be reduced to take refuge in some of their lurking holes about the uninhabited islands, where their fate would be like that of the fox in his den. If they should venture out, they would be hunted and taken, and if they stay within, they must starve. I must observe another thing, that the pirates generally shift their rovings according to the season of the year. In the summer they cruise mostly along the coast of the continent of America, but the winters there, being a little too cold for them, they follow the sun and go towards the islands at the approach of cold weather. Every man who has used the West India trade knows this to be true. Therefore, since we are so well acquainted with all their motions, I cannot see why our men of war, under a proper regulation, may not go to the southward, instead of lying up all the winter useless. But I shall proceed too far in this inquiry. I shall therefore quit it, and say something of the following sheets, which the author may venture to assure the reader that they have one thing to recommend them, which is truth. Those facts which he himself was not an eyewitness of, he had from the authentic relations of the persons concerned in taking the pirates, as well as from the mouths of the pirates themselves, after they were taken. And he conceives no man can produce better testimonies to support the credit of any history. It will be observed that the account of the actions of Roberts, runs into a greater length than that of any other pirate, for which we can assign two reasons. First, because he ravaged the seas longer than the rest, and of consequence there may be a greater scene of business in his life. Secondly, being resolved not to weary the reader with tiresome repetitions, when we found the circumstances in Roberts's life and other pirates, either as to piratical articles or anything else to be the same, we thought it best to give them but once, and chose Robert's life for that purpose, he having made more noise in the world than some others. As to the lives of our two female pirates, we must confess they may appear a little extravagant, yet they are nevertheless true for seeming so. But as they were publicly tried for their piracies, there are living witnesses enough to justify what we have laid down concerning them. It is certain we have produced some particulars which were not so publicly known. The reason is, we were more inquisitive into the circumstances of their past lives than other people who had no other design than that of gratifying their own private curiosity. If there are some incidents and turns in their stories which may give them a little the air of a novel, they are not invented or contrived for that purpose. It is a kind of reading this author is but little acquainted with, but as he himself was exceedingly diverted with them when they were related to him, he thought they might have the same effect upon the reader. I presume we need make no apology for giving the name of a history to the following sheets, though they contain nothing but the actions of a parcel of robbers. It is bravery and strategy in war which make actions worthy of record, in which sense the adventures here related will be thought deserving that name. Plutarch is very circumstantial in relating the actions of Spartacus the slave, and makes the conquest of him one of the greatest glories of Marcus Crassus, and it is probable, if this slave had lived a little longer, Plutarch would have given us his life at large. Rome, the mistress of the world, was no more at first than a refuge for thieves and outlaws, and if the progress of our pirates had been equal to their beginning, had they all been united and settled in some of those islands, they might by this time have been honored with the name of a commonwealth, and no power in those parts of the world could have been able to dispute it with them. If we have seemed to glance with some freedom at the behavior of some governors of provinces abroad, it has been with caution, and perhaps we have not declared as much as we knew. However, we hope those gentlemen in the same station, who have never given occasion for the like censure, will take no offense, though the word governor is sometimes made use of. P.S. It will be necessary to add a word or two to this preface in order to inform the reader that there are several material additions made to this second impression, which, swelling the book in bulk, must of consequence add a small matter to its price. The first impression having been received with so much success by the public, occasioned a very earnest demand for a second. In the meantime, several persons who had been taken by the pirates, as well as others who had been concerned in taking up them, have been so kind to communicate several facts and circumstances to us, which had escaped us in the first impression, This occasioned some delay. Therefore, if we have not brought it out as soon as wished, it was to render it the more complete. We shall not enter into a detail of all the new matter inserted here, but the description of the islands St. Thomas, etc., and that of Brazil are not to be passed by without a little notice. It must be observed that our speculative mathematicians and geographers, who are, no doubt, men of the greatest learning, seldom travel farther than their cloisters for their knowledge, etc., are therefore unqualified to give us a good description of countries. It is for this reason that all our maps and atlases are so monstrously faulty, for these gentlemen are obliged to take their accounts from the reports of illiterate men. It must be noted also that when the masters of ships make discoveries this way, they are not fond of communicating them. A man's knowing this or that coast better than others recommends him in his business and makes him more useful, and he'll no more discover it than a tradesman will the mystery of his trade. The gentleman who has taken the pains to make these observations is Mr. Atkins, a surgeon, an ingenious man in his own profession, and one who is not tied down by any narrow considerations from doing a service to the public, and has been pleased generously to communicate them for the good of others. I don't doubt but his observations will be found curious and very serviceable to such as trade to those parts. Besides, a method of trade is here laid down with the Portuguese, which may prove of great profit to some of our countrymen, if followed according to his plan. It is hoped these things will satisfy the public, that the author of the following sheets considered nothing so much as making the book useful, though he has been informed that some gentlemen have raised an objection against the truth of its contents, viz., that it seems calculated to entertain and divert. If the facts are related with some agreeableness and life, we hope it will not be imputed as a fault. But as to its credit, we can assure them that seafaring men, that is all that know the nature of these things, have not been able to make the least objection to its credit. And he will be bold to affirm that there is not a fact or circumstance in the whole book but he is able to prove by credible witnesses. There have been some other pirates besides those whose history are here related, such as are hereafter named, and their adventures are as extravagant and full of mischief as those who are the subject of this book. The author has already begun to digest them into method, and as soon as he receives some materials to make them complete, which he shortly expects from the West Indies, if the public gives him encouragement, he intends to venture upon a second volume. The History of the Pirates. Introduction. As the pirates in the West Indies have been so formidable and numerous that they have interrupted the trade of Europe into those parts, and our English merchants in particular have suffered more by their depredations than by the united force of France and Spain in the late war, we do not doubt but the world will be curious to know the original and progress of these desperadoes who were the terror of the trading part of the world. But before we enter upon their particular history, it will not be amiss, by way of introduction, to show by some examples drawn from history the great mischief and danger which threaten kingdoms and commonwealths from the increase of these sort of robbers, when either by the troubles of particular times or the neglect of governments they are not crushed before they gather strength. It has been the case heretofore that when a single pirate has been suffered to range the seas as not being worth the notice of a government, he has by degrees grown so powerful as to put them to the expense of a great deal of blood and treasure before he was suppressed. We shall not examine how it came to pass that our pirates in the West Indies have continually increased till of late. This is an inquiry which belongs to the legislature or representatives of the people in Parliament, and to them we shall leave it. Our business shall be briefly to show what from beginnings as inconsiderable as these other nations have suffered. In the times of Marius and Sylla, Rome was in her greatest strength. Yet she was so torn in pieces by the factions of those two great men that everything which concerned the public good was altogether neglected. When certain pirates broke out from Sicilia, a country of Asia Minor, situated on the coast of the Mediterranean, betwixt Syria on the east, from whence it is divided by Mount Taurus, and Armenia Minor on the west. This beginning was mean and inconsiderable, having but 2 or 3 ships and a few men, with which they cruised about the Greek islands, taking such ships as were very ill armed or weakly defended. However, by the taking of many prizes, they soon increased in wealth and power. The first action of theirs which made a noise was the taking of Julius Caesar, who was as yet a youth, and who, being obliged to fly from the cruelties of Sylla, who sought his life, went into Bithynia and sojourned a while with Nicomedes, king of that country. In his return back by sea, he was met with and taken by some of these pirates near the island of Formicusa. These pirates had a barbarous custom of tying their prisoners back to back and throwing them into the sea. But supposing Caesar to be some person of a high rank because of his purple robes and the number of attendants, they thought it would be more for their profit to preserve him, in hopes of receiving a great sum for his ransom. Therefore they told him he should have his liberty, provided he would pay them 20 talents, which they judged to be a very high demand, in our money about 3,600 pounds sterling. He smiled, and of his own accord promised them 50 talents. They were both pleased and surprised at his answer, and consented that several of his attendants should go by his direction and raise the money, and he was left among these ruffians with no more than 3 attendants. He passed 38 days, and seemed so little concerned or afraid that often when he went to sleep, he used to charge them not to make a noise, threatening, if they disturbed him, to hang them all. He also played at dice with them, and sometimes wrote verses and dialogues which he used to repeat, and also caused them to repeat, and if they did not praise and admire them, he would call them beasts and barbarians, telling them he would crucify them. They took all these as the sallies of a juvenile humor, and were rather diverted than displeased at them. At length his attendants returned with his ransom, which he paid, and was discharged. He sailed for the port of Miletum, where as soon as he was arrived, he used all his art and industry in fitting out a squadron of ships, which he equipped and armed at his own charges, and sailing in quest of the pirates, he surprised them as they lay at anchor among the islands, and took those who had taken him before with some others. The money he found upon them he made prize of to reimburse his charges, and he carried the men to Pergamus or Troy, and there secured them in prison. In the meantime he applied himself to Junius, then governor of Asia, to whom it belonged to judge and determine of the punishment of these men. But Junius, finding there was no money to be had, answered Caesar that he would think at his leisure what was to be done with those prisoners. Caesar took his leave of him, returned back to Pergamus, and commanded that the prisoners should be brought out and executed according to law in that case provided, which is taken notice of in a chapter at the end of this book concerning the laws in cases of piracy. And thus he gave them that punishment in earnest which he had often threatened them with in jest. Caesar went straight to Rome, where, being engaged in the designs of his own private ambition, as were almost all the leading men in Rome, the pirates who were left had time to increase to a prodigious strength. For while the civil wars lasted, the seas were left unguarded, so that Plutarch tells us that they erected diverse arsenals full of all manner of warlike stores, made commodious harbors, set up watchtowers and beacons all along the coasts of Cilicia, that they had a mighty fleet, well equipped and furnished, with galleots of oars, manned not only with men of desperate courage, but also with expert pilots and mariners. They had their ships of force, and light pinnaces for cruising and making discoveries, in all no less than 1,000 sail, so gloriously set out that they were as much to be envied for their gallant show as feared for their force, having the stern and quarters all gilded with gold, and their oars plated with silver, as well as purple sails, as if their greatest delight had been to glory in their iniquity. Nor were they content with committing piracies and insolences by sea. They committed as great depredations by land, or rather made conquests, for they took and sacked no less than 400 cities, laid several others under contributions, plundered the temples of the gods, and enriched themselves with the offerings deposited in them. They often landed bodies of men, who not only plundered the villages along the sea-coast, but ransacked the fine houses of the noblemen along the Tiber. A body of them once took Sextilius and Belinus, 2 Roman praetors in their purple robes, going from Rome to their governments, and carried them away with all their sergeants, officers, and vergers. They also took the daughter of Antonius, a consular person, and one who had obtained the honor of a triumph, as she was going to the country house of her father. But what was most barbarous was a custom they had when they took any ship, of inquiring of the person on board concerning their names and country. If any of them said he was a Roman, they fell down upon their knees, as if in affright at the greatness of that name and begged pardon for what they had done, and imploring his mercy, they used to perform the offices of servants about his person, and when they found they had deceived him into a belief of their being sincere, they hung out the ladder of the ship, and coming with a show of courtesy, told him he had his liberty, desiring him to walk out of the ship, and this in the middle of the sea. And when they observed him in surprise, as was natural, they used to throw him overboard with mighty shouts of laughter, so wanton they were in their cruelty. Thus, while Rome was mistress oft of the world, she suffered insults and affronts almost at her gates from these powerful robbers. But what for a while made faction cease and roused the genius of that people never used to suffer wrongs from a fair enemy was an excessive scarcity of provisions in Rome, occasioned by all the ships loaden with corn and provisions from Sicily, Corsica, and other places, being intercepted and taken by these pirates, insomuch that they were almost reduced to a famine. Upon this, Pompey the Great was immediately appointed general to manage this war. 500 ships were immediately fitted out. He had 14 senators, men of experience in the war, for his vice-admirals. And so considerable an enemy were these ruffians become, that no less than an army of 100,000 foot and 5,000 horse was appointed to invade them by land. But it happened very luckily for Rome that Pompey sailed out before the pirate had intelligence of a design against them, so that their ships were scattered all over the Mediterranean, like bees gone out from a hive, some one way, some another, to bring home their lading. Pompey divided his fleet into 13 squadrons, to whom he appointed their several stations, so that great numbers of the pirates fell into his hands, ship by ship, without any loss. 40 days he passed in scouring the Mediterranean, some of the fleet cruising along the coast of Africa, some about the islands, and some upon the Italian coasts, so that often those pirates who were flying from one squadron fell in with another. However, some of them escaped, and these, making directly to Cilicia and acquainting their confederates on shore with what had happened, they appointed a rendezvous of all the ships that had escaped at the port of Corcysium in the same country. Pompey, finding the Mediterranean quite clear, appointed a meeting of all his fleet at the haven of Brundusium, and from thence sailing round into the Adriatic, he went directly to attack these pirates in their hives. As soon as he came near the Corcysium in Cilicia, where the remainder of the pirates now lay, they had the hardiness to come and give him battle. But the genius of old Rome prevailed, and the pirates received an entire overthrow, being all either taken or destroyed. But as they made many strong fortresses upon the sea coast, and built castles and strongholds up the country about the foot of Mount Taurus, he was obliged to besiege them with his army. Some places he took by storm, others surrendered to his mercy, to whom he gave their lives, and at length he made an entire conquest. But it is probable that had these pirates received sufficient notice of the Roman preparation against them, so as they might have had time to draw their scattered strength into a body to have met Pompey by sea, the advantage appeared greatly on their side in numbers of shipping and of men. nor did they want courage, as may be seen by their coming out of the port of Corcysium to give the Romans battle, with a force much inferior to theirs. I say, had they overthrown Pompey, it is likely they would have made greater attempts, and Rome, which had conquered the whole world, might have been subdued by a parcel of pirates. This is a proof how dangerous it is to governments to be negligent, and not take an early care in suppressing these sea banditi before they gather strength. The truth of this maxim may be better exemplified in the history of Barbarous, a native in the city of Mytilene in the island of Lesbos in the Aegean Sea, a fellow of ordinary birth, who being bred to the sea, first set out from thence upon the pirating account with only one small vessel. But by the prizes he took, he gained immense riches, so that getting a great number of large ships, all the bold and dissolute fellows of those islands flocked to him and listed in his service for the hopes of booty, so that his strength was increased to a formidable fleet. With these he performed such bold and adventurous actions that he became the terror of the seas. About this time it happened that Selim Utemi, king of Algiers, having refused to pay the accustomed tribute to the Spaniards, was apprehensive of an invasion from thence. Wherefore he treated with Barbaroux, upon the foot of an ally, to come and assist him, and deliver him from paying this tribute. Barbaroux readily came into it, and sailing to Algiers with a great fleet, he put part of his men on shore, and having laid a plot to surprise the city, he effected it with great success, and murdered Selim in a bath, soon after which he was himself crowned king of Algiers. After this he made war upon Abdalabde, king of Tunis, and overthrew him in battle. He extended his conquests on all sides, and thus from a thief became a mighty king. And though he was at last killed in battle, yet he had so well established himself upon that throne that, dying without issue, he left the inheritance of the kingdom to his brother, another pirate. I come now to speak of the pirates infesting the West Indies, where they are more numerous than in any other parts of the world, on several reasons. First, because there are so many uninhabited little islands and keys, with harbors convenient and secure for cleaning their vessels, and abounding with what they often want, provision. I mean water, sea fowl, turtle, shell, and other fish, where, if they carry in but strong liquor, they indulge a time, and become ready for new expeditions before any intelligence can reach to hurt them. It may here perhaps be no unnecessary digression to explain upon what they call keys in the West Indies. These are small sandy islands, appearing a little above the surf of the water, with only a few bushes or weeds upon them, but abound, those most at any distance from the main, with turtle, amphibious animals that always choose the quietest and most unfrequented place for laying their eggs, which are to a vast number in the seasons, and would seldom be seen but for this, except by pirates. Then vessels from Jamaica and the other governments make voyages, called turtling, for supplying the people a common and approved food with them. I am apt to think these keys, especially those nigh islands, to have been once contiguous with them and separated by earthquakes frequently there, or inundations, because some of them that have been within continual view, as those nigh Jamaica, are observed within our time to be entirely wasted away and lost, and others daily wasting. There are not only of the use above taken notice of to pirates, but it is commonly believed were always in buccaneering piratical times the hiding places for their riches, and oftentimes a shelter for themselves, till their friends on the main had found means to obtain indemnity for their crimes. For you must understand, when acts of grace were more frequent and the laws less severe, these men continually found favors and encouragers at Jamaica, and perhaps they are not all dead yet. I have been told many of them still living have been of the same trade, and left it off only because they can live as well honestly and gain now at the hazard of others' necks. Secondly, another reason why these seas are chose by pirates is the great commerce thither by French, Spaniards, Dutch, and especially English ships. They are sure in the latitude of these trading islands to meet with prizes, booties of provision, clothing, and naval stores, and sometimes money, there being great sums remitted this way to England, the returns of the affiento and private slave trade to the Spanish West Indies, and in short, by some one or other, all the riches of Potosi. A third reason is the inconveniency and difficulty of being pursued by the men of war. The many small inlets, lagoons, and harbors on these solitary islands and keys is a natural security. 'Tis generally here that the pirates begin their enterprises, setting out at first with a very small force, and by infesting these seas and those of the continent of North America, in a year's time, if they have good luck on their sides, they accumulate such strength as enables them to make foreign expeditions. The first is usually to Guinea, taking the Azores and the Cape de Verde Islands in their way, and then to Brazil and the East Indies, where, if they meet with prosperous voyages, they set down at Madagascar or the neighboring islands, and enjoy their ill-gotten wealth among their elder brethren with impunity. But that I may not give too much encouragement to the profession, I must inform my maritime readers that the far greater part of these rovers are cut short in the pursuit by a sudden precipitation into the other world. The rise of these rovers since the Peace of Utrecht, or at least the great increase of them, may justly be computed to the Spanish settlements in the West Indies, the governors of which, being often some hungry courtiers sent thither to repair or make a fortune, generally countenance all proceedings that bring in profit. They grant commissions to great numbers of vessels of war on pretense of preventing an interloping trade, with orders to seize all ships or vessels whatsoever within 5 leagues of their coasts, which our English ships cannot well avoid coming in their voyage to Jamaica. But if the Spanish captains chance to exceed this commission and rob and plunder at discretion, the sufferers are allowed to complain and exhibit a process in their court, and after great expense of suit, delay of time, and other inconveniences, obtain a decree in their favor. But then, when the ship and cargo comes to be claimed with costs of suit, they find to their sorrow that it has been previously condemned and the plunder divided among the crew. The commander that made the capture, who alone is responsible, is found to be a poor rascally fellow not worth a groat, and no doubt is placed in that station for the like purposes. The frequent losses sustained by our merchants abroad by these pirates was provocation enough to attempt something by way of reprisal, and a fair opportunity offering itself in the year 1716, the traders of the West Indies took care not to slip it over, but made the best use of it their circumstances would permit. It was about 2 years before that the Spanish galleons, or plate fleet, had been cast away in the Gulf of Florida, and several vessels from the Havana were at work with diving engines to fish up the silver that was on board the galleons. The Spaniards had recovered some millions of pieces of eight, and had carried it all to the Havana, but they had at present about 350,000 pieces of eight in silver then upon the spot, and were daily taking up more. In the meantime, 2 ships and 3 sloops, fitted out from Jamaica, Barbados, etc., under Captain Henry Jennings, sailed to the Gulf and found the Spaniards there upon the wreck. The money before spoken of was left on shore, deposited in a storehouse under the government of 2 commissaries and a guard of about 60 soldiers. The rovers came directly upon the place, bringing their little fleet to an anchor, and in a word, landing 300 men, they attacked the guard, who immediately ran away. And thus they seized the treasure, which they carried off, making the best of their way to Jamaica. In their way they unhappily met with a Spanish ship bound from Portobello to the Havana with a great many rich goods, bales of cochineal, casks of indigo, and 60,000 pieces of eight more, which their hands being in they took, and having rifled the vessel, let her go. They went away to Jamaica with their booty, and were followed in view of the port by the Spaniards, who, having seen them thither, went back to the governor of the Havana with the account of it, who immediately sent a vessel to the governor of Jamaica to complain of this robbery and to reclaim the goods. As it was in full peace and contrary to all justice and right that this fact was committed, they were soon made sensible that the government at Jamaica would not suffer them to go unpunished, much less protect them. Therefore they saw a necessity of shifting for themselves. So, to make bad worse, they went to sea again, though not without disposing of their cargo to good advantage, and furnishing themselves with ammunition, provisions, etc. And being thus made desperate, they turned pirates, robbing not the Spaniards only, but their own countrymen, and any nation they could lay their hands on. It happened about this time that the Spaniards, with 3 or 4 small men of war, fell upon our logwood cutters in the Bay of Campeche and Bay of Honduras. and after they had made prizes of many ships and vessels, they gave the men belonging to them 3 sloops to carry them home. But these men, being made desperate by their misfortunes, and meeting with the pirates, they took on with them, and so increased their number. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from A General History of the Pirates, one of the first books ever written about piracy. I can't wait to return to this work and get into the individual stories of pirates, along with those riveting statutes and civil laws. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect or suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, contact me on our website at www.boringbookspod.com or catch me on Twitter at boringbookspod. I'd love to hear from you. I'm so glad you could join me this evening. Until our next boring book, good night.